Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq, with daily insight on the Nasdaq-100 Index, or the NDX, which is made up of 100 of the largest domestic and international non-financial innovative companies listed on Nasdaq. The NDX has been the barometer for U.S. large cap growth and also one of the best performing indexes over the last decade and a half, not to mention one of the most liquid index ecosystems in the world. Joining me this afternoon, we have Ryan McCormack, QQQ Equity ETF Strategist at Invesco, to discuss weekly trends in the Nasdaq-100. Ryan, it's great to have you with us as always. And of course, we'll take a look at weekly performance with the Qs versus the S&P.
Yeah, thanks, Jill. And far cry from when we spoke last week with QQQ down close to 10% the week prior. This week outperforming the S&P up 3.355% versus the S&P 500 at 2.13. That's good for 1.22 percentage points of outperformance. And extending the outperformance year to date with QQQ up around 31.7% versus the S&P up around 6.7. So, we're hovering right around that 25 percentage points of outperformance. And, as we speak, pretty much every week, it's driven by those three overweight sectors: discretionary, communication services, and technology. Although as we're looking today, QQQ lagging kind of on the back of Fed commentary. They left rates unchanged near zero. They noted that they were going to keep that policy till 2023 and use the phrase accommodative policy. So, you're starting to see today some more of that shift back into those unloved, unwanted names, which kind of explains why we're seeing Qs dragging relative to S&P 500.
Well, if we review weekly performance in terms of the stocks that were, adding to the gains there, it seems like it's the usual suspects that were up top.
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's kind of been the same story with these overweight sectors. And you and I have spoken, for a number of weeks here about the differentiation of QQQ holdings relative to, let's say, the S&P 500. And this chart is kind of a perfect indicator of that. When we're looking at the top 15 performers for the week in QQQ, the top four, Tesla, Moderna, Seattle Genetics, and Zoom, are not held in the S&P 500. And then you kind of go further down the list, number 13 and number 15 for the week, NXP Semiconductor and ASML, also not held in the S&P 500. The other 8 of those kind of top performers are all overweights within QQQ. So, we're consistently looking at this performance and these performance trends. And, we talk about differentiation of holdings. And, this is the prime example where you see these Qs overweights and those names that aren't held in the S&P continuing to perform and continue to help drive that relative outperformance.
All right, Ryan, one thing I do want to discuss, though, of course, valuation is always in question. So let's take a look at Nasdaq-100 earnings to see if we can support that valuation a bit.
Yeah, and it's something that we've spoken about over the past few weeks, and certainly I've received more questions on it. As you look, yes, it's from a relative standpoint and from a historical standpoint, QQQ and the Nasdaq-100 is probably elevated on a PE basis. But, when you're looking at this chart, it's showing your quarterly earnings of the Nasdaq-100. Now, look from last year to this year, Q1, you're seeing a huge drop off from Q4. And we saw kind of a similar trend last year, right? So you have some seasonality that's mixed in there. But when you look at Q2 this year relative to last year, I mean, there's no comparison. It's a precipitous drop. And obviously that's driven by kind of the impact of COVID on the markets. The Q3 number, that's a little skewed, obviously, as we haven't really seen the full slate of Q3 earnings. We'll have to wait to see where that number comes in at. But you can see as the earnings number of the Nasdaq-100 declines, obviously the PE ratio of the index is going to shoot up, especially considering the performance that we've seen in that index. So, I think this is starting to explain a little bit why we've seen this PE number continue to creep up and why we're receiving that question about valuations. But again, keep in mind that investors are positioning for that future earnings, right? That future earnings growth, and recognizing that, where these QQQ and Nasdaq-100 companies have positioned themselves in the marketplace, it sets them up for success down the road. So as we start to see this Q3, these Q4 earnings reports come in, one thing to be mindful of is to watch that valuation number. And if we start to see that mediate a little bit from what we've seen over the past few months.
Should be a fun October with all the earnings coming through and the election right around the corner.
Be no shortage of topics for us to talk about.
That is for sure, Ryan. Thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks.
Thanks, Jill.
And thanks for joining me. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.